Now, you have the pleasure of listening to people who are providing solutions in many of those different domains that come along with decentralized clinical trials. And we're going to go sort of in order down the line here, and then we'll have a little panel discussion at the end of these presentations. So first up, I have Marilee and Jenny here from LifeLabs, who are going to talk to us about how those patient services can be delivered in home. Right?
Yep. Battery, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks so much for the intro, Jane. So if I can learn how to, is that how I change it?
Just the green button.
Oh, the green button. Okay.
The big green one. It says next.
That one. All right. My name is Marilee Wilde. I'm with LifeLabs. I'm here with Jenny to talk to you about our decentralized services both today and in the future. So LifeLabs has participated in the clinical trials space for about 30 years. We currently are working with about 400 clinical trials. Our goal is to draw more large-scale clinical trials into Canada. And I know this is something that researchers would like to see, the government would like to see. Many organizations in Canada are kind of aligned with this goal. One of the key components in doing so is working better with our partners, so working better with you and industry, and especially working to build out solutions for decentralized clinical trials. So I'll give a quick overview. Jenny will go over the services we have today, and then I'm going to talk about future solutions that LifeLabs is building and just ask for your input, essentially. So LifeLabs, oh, sorry, back one. Just a quick overview. So LifeLabs has 14 laboratories, including a genetics lab. We do oncology gene testing. We do a whole lot of mobile phlebotomy, and we are able to deliver services across Canada. So by collecting samples nationally, we can process them in our labs. With that, I'll hand it over to Jenny.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for having us today. Really excited to be here. I've worked with many of you over the years. Really happy to share some of our services in the province to help support your trials and accessibility for everybody in this room and our participants. So thinking about LifeLabs really as an extension to your trials, so those satellite clinics, thinking about LifeLabs in that model. So in BC, we have 129 locations. We're located throughout the Lower Mainland, Vancouver Island. We're very happy that we just opened up a new location in Vernon, which is a very big deal for us to be in the Okanagan now. So that's fantastic. At our patient service centers, we can collect local testing. We can also customize a solution for you based on your protocol. So different tubes, different processing, centrifuging, aliquoting. We can really customize exactly what you need at our sites. Really thinking about LifeLabs coming to our sites to remove one of those barriers for the patients. So maybe removing that need to travel back to your site. Thinking about trust, and we heard that so many times today. Patients trust LifeLabs. They want to come to see us. They have their favorite phlebotomist, the only one that can find their vein. So we're happy to see those patients at the same time that they're maybe doing the same work from their specialist or GP. So when a patient service center isn't the best option, we do offer that home care collection, so mobile collections. So the same services that we do at our patient service centers, we can bring to the patient's home. We can bring the supplies, bring everything back, finish that processing and shipment to the destination, or of course analyze at LifeLabs. We also do mobile ECGs, so if that's something that your protocol requires, we can bring that to the patient's home. We also do quite a lot of group collections. So if you're thinking about having all your patients at your site in one visit, you can call LifeLabs to come and draw all those samples, as opposed to having the patients go back out and then come back in. And I wasn't planning on chatting about this today, but the comment earlier about long-term care. We are going to long-term care facilities right now. It's the same collectors that are going to homes and doing the group collections. So as those conversations are happening, please do include LifeLabs and see how we can be part of that solution and conversation with you. So our logistics network, just another infrastructure that we already have in place just to keep in mind for those remote locations. So we are going from patient service center to patient service center. We're doing daily pickup and drop-offs at local hospitals, here at UBC daily, but also those remote areas, we already have samples coming down. So if you have a remote patient and you just need a little bit of extra support, please do reach out and see if it's something that we can help with, whether we're booking mobile labs or logistics network. And reporting and tracking. So just one last thing just to help with maybe accessibility for the people in this room, just reviewing how we report out, mail and fax. I'm sure everybody in this room and online, they know who they are, who's still getting their reports this way. But we do also, we're integrated with numerous EMRs, so we can report online. If you're not set up with an EMR, we have our own Launchpad. So you can go directly into our online portal. This is true for physicians, but it's also true for the rest of the group. So any clinical trial team member that is following the patient's care, we can get you that same online access just to give a little bit more flexibility.
Moving on to solutions in the future. So there's two I want to talk to you folks about today. The first is data. So obviously, LifeLabs collects millions of data points every day through the patients we see, both today and over the years. What we would like to do is use this data to help clinical trials recruitment and site selection. So by either de-identifying data and helping you choose where the sick patients are located in Canada, or through patient recruitment with proper consent collection in place, we can proactively reach out to patients. There's a whole lot of different tools that we're building in these areas. And so gaining your insights and feedback on what would be useful to you and structured in what way, we're listening right now when it comes to that. Home kits are another exciting innovation. You'll see them start to come out through LifeLabs. We have a couple that are currently already available. So the fecal cal kit, there's one that's just fallen out of my head. But next year, we will be launching several, and in the years to come, if you do have a clinical trial where home kits would be useful, obviously it would need to be customized, but just getting your inputs could help our business casing decide which test we should turn into a home kit first. Lastly, I think that many are unaware of the collaborative partnerships that LifeLabs chooses to enter into, including those to support new drug launches and research developing new tests. So for example, I have Kidney Health down there. The ClinRisk test was just recently launched. This is in collaboration with a research group in Manitoba. So a physician designed a test that identifies patients earlier who are at risk of kidney disease. And so this can essentially give patients access to better healthcare earlier on so they don't lose as much of their life or their capacity with the disease. Outside of that, we have a number of different areas of research and areas where we can really partner with you. So I encourage you to reach out to us, let us know what you need. Especially in new areas of research, we might have some of this testing, this new testing in the works, and we can move the launch up or just look at ways in which we can expedite access for your trial. Overall, LifeLabs is listening, so come and say hi.
Thank you. Do you want to stay there or you want to go up here? Okay. So Dr. Kendall Ho is the director of the Digital Endpoints Lab, is that correct?
Yeah, Digital
Emergency Medicine Unit, which is a pretty fascinating space. So I can't wait to hear about it. And by the way, if you guys are interested, there's another cross-industry organization called DIME, the Digital Medicine Society, and they're working on all these new endpoints and how to integrate them in as regulatory. So Dr. Ho.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'm going to not use slide. I'm going to speak about 5 minutes or so. and I'm a bit of a pacer, so hopefully you don't have to keep tracking me, and I'll keep looking at the camera for the people joining online. I'm so glad to be invited here. Thank you very much for having me at the panel, and also thank you for the organizer for having me. It's my pleasure to be able to present here in Musqueam territories. I'm an invited settler who lives in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation, so it's a tremendous pleasure to be here. I'm very glad I'm following Jane because she already spoke to some of the ways that digital health is being used in decentralized, DCT. And so I'm very glad to just add maybe a little bit of color to some examples of using digital health in decentralized trials. I remember 2020, just when the COVID broke. I've been resistant to use my mobile phone to deposit checks. I don't know how many of you do that. I did digital banking, but I always, when I have a check, I always wanted to go into the bank and deposit it. But COVID pushed me into that technology, and since then, I never looked back and used that. The reason I really says this, that in fact, when we do trials, we think about doing trials in a hospital. We think about doing trials in clinic. And when we do a decentralized trial, how do we bring the trials closer to our patients? How do we leverage technology so that our patients can use that? And that's what I'd like to explore with you. And I'm going to use the digital check deposit as a bit of an analogy. I think when I think about using digital health for trials, there are at least 3 areas, and there's a fourth area that's emerging. The first is about virtual care, delivering services at the distance, using technology like your mobile phone, texting, emails, sending photographs, or video conferencing so that patients and health professionals and researchers can interact. So this is one form, virtual care of digital health, or other people call it telehealth, and that's been a long history of that. The second is about wearables, or ways to measure your physiology. So Jane's favorite is a ring, which is fantastic. Some of you, I'm sure you have watches. Think about those types of wearables, but also think about things like virtual reality, things like Meta, where you go in and have an avatar, things like your voice, things like when you speak on the phone, your voice shows your emotions, the words, the texting, the frequency, all of that. It's a way of monitoring, a way of remote patient monitoring. So think about those possibilities as a second. I will come back to privacy as an issue, but the possibility is there for us to do that. So one, virtual care. Second, monitoring or remote patient monitoring. And then the third really is the data. The data science. How do we look at electronic health record as a record of the patient, not only to look back at what they have, not only to use it today in terms of how we deliver care, but look into the future to say, well, how can we use that data to help with decision support? How can we look at all those data together so that we can not only help individual patients, but population health? Now, the fourth area is about genomes, genomics, proteomics. That's going to be emerging, but I think that in itself is going to be a big subject, so I won't be talking about that today. Now, out of those 3, what are some of the advantages? Very fortunately, since 2015, my team, Digital Emergency Medicine Unit, Jen is one of my colleagues there. We've been working on a trial on sending patients home with heart failure from hospital. And so using that as an example, we provide them with virtual care so that we connect with them, a nurse talk with them. And at that point, when we first started, we didn't use video. And secondly, we provide them with blood pressure cuffs, weight scale, oxygen saturation, and a tablet to ask, how do you feel? So remote patient monitoring. And then with that, we want to decide, when we send patients home, did that actually help them? And so in some ways, we stumbled. I learned a lot from that trial. I continue to learn a lot from that trial. What are the advantages? Well, for the patients, when we recruit from 21 communities in British Columbia, that they didn't have to come all to Vancouver, Victoria, and Kelowna. In their communities, they were discharged from the hospital, but in fact, we reached them at their own home. So it's about equity of access, and they can access this type of trial to be able to have convenience. Secondly, think about the opportunities for language. The fact that I use Google, and especially when I go to different countries, I use that to help translate. So how do we leverage that so that we can actually reach more population? But deeper than language is the culture, is the understanding of how we interact with them. I had a wonderful time interacting with Munaza this morning, and later on we'll have more chance to do so. It's about understanding how do we reach the culture and how we can use technology to build that relationship. I think that's going to be a very important piece. And then Brittany talked about cultural safety, the importance of how do we reach into and support Indigenous community members to do that. All those are huge advantages, really cluster around the increasing equity of access to clinical care and to research. I'm just going to highlight a few issues, perhaps. I think about the trial administration. How do we, for example, the intervention of the trial? Now, in our case, it was about monitoring of patient going home. But one of the debates Jen and I and our team always debate on is, yeah, we can remote, but what if they have emergency? Would they use that? And if they use that and they live 20 minutes away, 1 hour away, 3 hours away from hospital, how do we handle that? I think that's something we need to think about in clinical trials, because by doing trials, we do have the responsibility to keep our patients safe. So how do we break the glass in case the safety is breached? I think that's going to be important. And secondly, how do we handle the data, the quality of the data, the privacy of collecting that data as we're in different sites? Again, a very important piece to think about. In terms of the infrastructure of the community, it's also important. There are communities currently who have broadband. There are communities that may not. We have more satellite access to sites now, but it's not even. And also, the access to the technologies in that community may not be even either, whether you can buy it, whether you have to order it in, or whether it's even available. For the patients themselves, if for interventions that the patient need to have some kind of intervention, et cetera, how do they self-administer your trial in terms of how they do? Because they are, in some ways, the reason for centralized trial is that we can standardize some of those treatment approaches. And then how do you start to standardize that? And digital literacy, supporting our patients to be able to use it, and also trust that we talked about. And finally, there are certain things that technology can do, but certain things technology marginalize. For example, a person with issues with sight or sound, technology may not be as good in those cases. So those are things that I would suggest that we would think about. And as we design the trials, there are certain resources. Jane, I copied down your website. I'm gonna religiously go back there. You also alluded to the FDA document of the draft guidelines on digital technologies in clinical investigation. It's a must-read if you're interested in using digital health. Lots of excellent points. And also, as Jane said, they're now open for your comments. And so do support that. Health Canada had two guidance documents. One of them is guidance on clinical evidence requirements of medical devices. That was in November 2022. And in January 2023, they also have a guidance on the clinical evidence of medical devices. Again, very good read for those who are interested to go deeper, to say, yeah, I like to use a ring. I like to use a phone. I like to use oxygen saturation machines. Those will give you great insights. My last comment is a little bit about the future. What are some of the emerging opportunities? We know that our community members, many of them, how many of you have some wearables on you to measure something about yourself? Yeah, not surprisingly, at least 2/3. And then also 1/3 of you don't want to put away your hand, but in fact you do. That's my guess, I'm sorry. I'm too enthusiastic about that. So that's one opportunity. But think about, currently there are emerging opportunities. For example, emergency department, we discharge patients home with oxygen saturation machine because they have COVID. You may clinically use technologies to monitor our patients. We've done a study on discharging patients from emergency department with blood pressure cuff with hypertension, that actually improves hypertensive care. And then also in this province, and in fact across the country and globally, we're talking about hospital at home, where we actually admit patients at home with digital technologies. These are the ways that we can start embedding technologies into clinical care, and we, as research communities, should think about how do we take advantage of those opportunities to support our patients. How do we know we arrive there? I think if we start to think about digital health to increase equity, if we start to use the technology to increase diversity and also supporting the underserved and also increasing convenience for our patients, if today we create the opportunities that Jane talked about and tomorrow embed ourselves into deliver digital health, imagine every time we see a patient digitally, we say, can I sign you up for a trial? That would be amazing if we can get there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Super inspiring. Like, thank you for that. And yeah, let's get that can you sign up for a trial feature when we're discharging patients. I love that. All right, it is now my pleasure to introduce Émilie Lévesque. And she is currently at AbCellera, but I think she's going to tell us stories about how to actually set up and run these trials.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I work at AbCellera. It's a wonderful Vancouver-born and based company. But I'm going to talk about my previous life because AbCellera is building the clinical research space at the moment. So patients are coming, but not yet. So I used to work for a big pharma, and I'm going to talk about what we've put in place during the COVID pandemic for some of our largest oncology trials. So if you're in the oncology space, you know that those study visits, they're long. So most of the hospital, they will split up the visit in 2 days, 2 consecutive days. So they do all the blood work, ECG, scans, blah, 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 blah. And then the next day, the principal investigator or the investigator can confirm everything is good, and then they can administer the drug on the second day. So during the pandemic, obviously, as a cancer patient, you don't want to go to an hospital with COVID. So we tried to minimize those 2 days visit by providing a service, a home health service. So nurses were going to the patient's home. I'm kind of out of breath. I don't know why. So they were going to a patient's home to do, directed physical exam, collect blood sample, urine samples, do the ECGs, vitals, etc. So as you might be aware, I'm sure you are, during the pandemic, Health Canada put in place a guidance how to run clinical trials, and the e-consent was not really there. Well, it wasn't there at all. So they talk a little bit about remote consent. And because of privacy regulations, we could not just the site could not just give the patient's address and then phone number, then call the patient and then go get the blood. So we needed the patient's consent. So we had to put in place with the RRBs a written process for remote consent and how to do that. Sometimes elderly patients don't have email, so we could not email the consent to them, so we mailed it to them. We had to get RB approval as per the guidance. We had to get institution approval because nurses outside of the hospital were taking care of their patients. We put Skype, FaceTime, so then we could confirm that the patient signed and it was not his wife or partner that signed. In that guidance, sometimes they were either referring to recording the conversation. We're like, okay, whoa, maybe not. Signature with a FaceTime is more than enough. And then we've put in place that once the patient comes to the clinic, the fully executed consent would be given to the participants. So then they have also a trace of giving their consent to share their personal information with the other service provider. So we've contracted home health service provider based in Quebec and a local lab that had lab a little bit everywhere. So then the nurses, once they collect the sample, they can just drive the sample by the nearest lab close to the patient's home. We also, because those nurses sometimes don't have GCP trainings, we're in a clinical trial space, so we made sure that every nurses that were going to a patient's home had GCP trainings. We collected their CV, license, to make sure that they were qualified. We put them in contact with the principal investigator because the principal investigator at the beginning wasn't really PI oversight. I don't know that nurse, they're doing things. Like they were not very sure, but then, trust was built and it worked. We also, to facilitate the nurse's job, we designed source document. Sponsors should not do that. We really should not do that, but we did with the site staff. So to help the nurse from the home health service provider, which, each visit might be a little different. Do I have to do temperature? Do I have to do vitals? Do I have to do urine? So we help with that so that the nurse knew exactly what to do at each visit. And then we the site staff trained the nurse on the requisition. Obviously, per training, a nurse is used to see requisition for blood, but every hospital have their flair. So we made sure that they understand what it was. We trained them on the source document. We made them in contact with the study nurse because they basically became study nurse when they went to the patient home. So we wanted also to make sure that the study nurse, and not only the PI, but the study nurse at the site, was also comfortable working with the nurse going to a patient's home. Delegation. They had to sign the delegation log. Again, at the beginning, the PI was like, I don't know her. I didn't contract her. I have no idea. I don't want to do that. But then, GCP, you have no choice. So we've put them in contact. They had a meeting, FaceTimes, to build the trust, and it worked. So we emailed the delegation log to, we did not as the sponsor, but the site emailed the study nurse, the delegation. So each time a new nurse was assigned, because obviously Montreal is a large, so the patients could be coming from 2 hours away. So it was not always the same nurse that was going to see a patient. So each time we knew that there was a patient that needed a visit like that, then we quickly assigned the nurse, and then the PI could meet her if requires. At the beginning, he did, and then after what, trust was built, so that was good. And then you could sign the delegation log each time that there was a new nurse. So the process was that once a patient needed to be having those kinds of visits, they signed the ICF. After it was approved by the RAB, it was a very quick ICF for once. It's kind of refreshing to have a one-page ICF. And then the site staff would send the request to the nurse's home, the home health service provider, with the requisition. The nurse would then call the patient, book the appointment, and then went to the nurse's home, to the patient's home. My God. Once they complete the source document, they do their blood draw, et cetera, in their car right away, they were taking picture of the source document and emailing it to the investigator and to the study nurse, so then they can make the assessment if at least all the physical stuff was okay for the visit the next day, because the investigator needed to do the prescription for the pharmacy to prepare the drug for the next day. So that was done. Then the nurse would drive the samples to the closest local lab for analysis, and we provided, and the local lab provided a portal so that the nurses could go in. She was getting a notification when the blood results were in, and she could go into the portal and get the lab results. And then the investigator then had everything in their hand to make sure that the patient was eligible for the visit the next day. So that's how it works. Finally, the original source document from the nurse was also mailed to the study nurse, because those photos from the car were not certified copy. So after a few bumps, obviously, I think the patient really appreciated to reduce their chance of having COVID and to limit their ability to continue on the trial if they were to get COVID and have cancer at the same time. I think the site staff as well appreciated, because they had also limited space at the hospital during COVID. Like they could work from home as well. So by having not to do a visit like that for just blood work, ECG, vitals, then they could stay home too and be safer as well. So that was the lesson learned. I don't know what's going to happen with that. I don't work with that company anymore. But I'm going to put that in place for AbCellera. Thank you.
So Émilie described the real life of living through adapting on the fly. I will say that one thing that inspires me right now is a lot of different providers are building technology platforms, so you don't have to take a picture of the source note anymore. It's an e-source collection that then gets integrated right into the clinical data set, which helps with oversight and compliance. But it's coming, and thank you for pioneering it on the fly to prove this is doable and patients like it. All right, Nathan, you get to bring up the end of the panel, and he's going right back to electronic consent and how that fits into the trial model.
All right,
Probably
is my
other
mic
tools
working?
too.
Okay, good. And I just realized I'm one of those that needs to update my profile picture. Just calling that out, just in case you saw that. And before I start, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. It's really an honor. I actually started in clinical research doing a lot of handwriting. And when I mean that, I actually wrote data from one piece of paper to another piece of paper. And this was at a time when I was doing online banking and all these other things online already. And I had no idea the challenges that the industry had at the time. And so from my good old days of data entry, I've now seeked a different path. And it's kind of ironic that I noticed that problem at the very beginning, and now I get to talk about solutions that solve those problems. And so it's a real honor to be here today. And so we'll talk about e-consent and electronic tools, and I too like to pace, so sorry if I'm standing in front of some of the colleagues here. Now, I guess I do need my slide piece here. Which button is it? There we go. All right, so the agenda will basically talk about tools available for sites. And so as we know, traditionally in research, a lot of technology comes from sponsors and CROs. But what we're hearing from sites and what we've heard for a while is that they just don't work that great. Or there's a big tech burden. You have multiple systems to log into, lots of things to juggle. I always picture coordinators just juggling because I saw them doing that at the site. And if they drop one ball, then everything could fall. And so these technologies that are available for sites have really been oriented to help eliminate that burden. There are challenges in adopting these technologies, and so I'll hit on a few of the items that I come across on a regular basis talking to sites all around the world, whether it's a sales call, a customer, or other things going on. And then I know compliance is always a big issue. That's actually one of the hurdles of adopting technology. That could be its own webinar in its own right, but we'll touch on that if we have time. So a lot of you are already familiar with real-time CTMS. If you're not using that CTMS, you're using some other CTMS to run all of your business operations. Usually we picture it as a financial system. It does accounting, it does finance, but it also handles patient tracking, visit tracking, scheduling, all those core business functions that keep the lights on and keep the patients coming in. But we also now have tools available that integrate with that CTMS so that it does reduce that tech burden. No more logins or additional logins and less friction to use those. And it's usually a better workflow because it's built into your existing CTMS workflows. And so those are things to consider when you're adopting technology. eSource and eRegulatory, those have been out for quite a while now. We have a lot of sites using those already. And so we're noticing the trend is not stopping, that sites are starting to get their own technology. And even when sponsors recommend a certain system, sites push back and say, hey, I have my own system and my own SOPs, and this is why we do it. They sell the value to the sponsor, and the sponsors are becoming very familiar with that process. Now, e-consent is the latest tool that has been asked for. And when we started to design e-consent, it was initially, hey, how do we make this process electronic? But then after talking to several customers who worked with sponsors that handed their e-consent solutions down to the sites, we realized it just wasn't working for various reasons, and one of those was the patient experience. And so we decided that we weren't just designing e-consent, we were actually providing a participant experience, which led to My Study Manager. And so this is an entire participant portal that does much more than e-consent. So if you can think about having your study in your pocket, it's a mobile app that you can do e-consent, virtual visits, basically telemedicine on. You can do e-pro and e-diary. One of the nice things about this that we designed was the participant satisfaction survey. I call them PSATs. I don't think I was the first one to call it that, so it's not original. But essentially, you can get that feedback from participants as they complete visits. And we made it very simple. It's a happy face or a sad face. So are you happy or sad? If you're sad, you get to tell the site why. And then now you have a scorecard. You can start to see what's going on at each visit and if they're a good experience or not. And then you can tailor that experience. I've seen other sites use a paper version of this, and people drop that in a Dropbox. That works as well. It's just not as efficient, and you can't report off of it very well. I've also seen sites use SurveyMonkey or other questionnaire systems. That's better, but it's not integrated into your system. Think about automated questionnaires that get sent out right after a visit, and you don't have to do that manual work. Lots of efficiencies. I don't think I have to sell you on all of these. We've seen this with electronic systems, no more hunting signatures. I know at several of the sites I've worked at over time, we had investigators all over the city, and we would have to drive to get signatures. And so you don't have to do that anymore. Also, centralized filing, auto filing, those things just save time because it's reducing the manual work. I think one of the really nice things about the technology that's available for sites is the flexibility it offers. And so whether it's a traditional visit or a virtual visit or a combination, the technology is there to adapt to that. And a lot of sites will just build their processes around the technology. And every site has their own processes, and so the technology is still able to be flexible with that as well. Another big item would be the improving accessibility, especially for those populations that may be geographically excluded. We heard earlier that people just don't want to drive to the visit, or maybe it's just too far away for people to actually participate significantly in the study. And so we can break those geographical barriers using technology and telemedicine and things like that. And then, of course, less visits without compromising patient engagement. So early on, when we started designing some of these tools, people would say, well, we're going to lose that personal touch that we have with the patients. And really what we learned through COVID is that having video on during virtual calls actually create a pretty tight connection with people, even without seeing them physically. And so at RealTime, we have a policy, and I won't lie, it's a little tiring sometimes, but we always have to have the camera on. But I do realize the benefit of it because I can see people smiling. I can see people whenever they're not smiling. I can gauge the room better instead of just a dark screen on the computer. I'll try to cover these quickly because I know I have limited time to talk for hours on this stuff, and you'll probably tell me never to come to Canada again if I keep talking. So one of the reasons I've seen for not adopting this technology is the protocols need to catch up. And we did hear about that a little bit earlier in the previous presentation. I've actually seen, DCT's trending upwards. I've seen surveys where 60% or more participants are asking for flexibility, basically meaning less visits to the site. And they want the trial to fit more of their, fit into their life activities, so to speak. Also, virtual visits need to be approved in more protocols. We even have an opportunity with current protocols to turn telephone visits into virtual visits, just to improve that connection that I talked about. But we need amendments for that. Not to mention e-consent. Another barrier that we have seen is just needing amendments to protocols to get e-consent approved. And so protocols are hindering us in some ways. Change can also be hard. And so sites are already using a lot of processes that work. It may not be efficient, but we trust paper for the most part. It has errors and things, but we've built processes around it, and we're doing pretty good at it. So it's kind of hard to change those processes and SOPs to adopt new technology. Also, there's uncertainty with regulations and lack of clarity that leads to hesitation. I've always said that it helps to have a champion at the site or multiple champions, and that just means that you have someone or a team of people that is there to tell your team why you're doing this, so they know the why. And then also, anytime there's an obstacle, they're there to help overcome that obstacle and keep it moving forward so that the rest of the team does not say, oh my God, this isn't working, we just need to go back to paper. So that's the risk, is going back to paper, and we want to keep moving forward. Also, many other sites have already done this, and so there's a lot of blueprints out there. Whether you talk to sites or talk to your solution provider who connects you with those people, or just get your solution provider's perspective, you can find those blueprints. Cost. This is actually one of the most common things that I hear on calls, is just cost. How much is it going to cost me? Can we justify it? I think we should reframe it in that, what will it cost us not to adopt these technologies? If you don't adopt these technologies, you'll get left behind potentially. Will you be ready for those protocols that are coming your way? Probably not, if you don't have the technology to handle it. And so thinking about that might help you reframe your mind. There's also a lot of ways that sites have worked this into their budget, especially for sponsor-initiated trials. You can work these into your budget to where you're either breaking even, or we have a lot of sites creating significant revenue off of it as well. So they're charging a premium on top of what they're being charged by their provider because of the value it brings to them. And so there's the remote monitoring, the better data quality, the better participant experience, all those things that are very valuable to the sponsor and CRO. Now, if you do have tight budgets and it's maybe an investigator-initiated trial or something like that, then it's really important to focus on the efficiencies that you're gaining and also the opportunities. And so again, there might be a trial that comes your way, but do you have the technology to handle that trial in today's age? And so focusing on those things will be the more important thing. Regulatory concerns, and so I have seen, whether it's the US, Canada, EU, as well as Australia, there's always concerns. And a lot of it comes to just needing a new understanding about regulations and how systems fit into those regulations. And so a lot of it can be coached through. And so I always joke with my teams at RealTime is that sometimes I feel like we're life coaches, because we're literally coaching our customers through some of their fears and concerns and helping them implement things that they weren't really ready to at the beginning, but by the time we're able to talk them through those things or their concerns, then they understand it a little better and they're more willing. So we do have Annex 11 and Part 11 compliance. Of course, Part 11 is for the US and FDA, but Annex 11 applies to Canada. Lots of overlap. And so typically, if you're compliant with one, you'll be compliant with the other. That, again, is a whole nother talk, but hopefully we'll touch on a little bit here in a second. Also, remember that regulators are paving the way. They tell us what to do and not necessarily how to do it. And some of that is by design, because they do not want to tell us to do it one way whenever there is a multitude of ways to do something. So that lack of clarity that we often complain about from regulators is also there to benefit us to innovate. So just keep that in mind. But with that said, a lot of the clarity comes from industry best practices and things that are being broadly adopted. And so anywhere there's not specific how-to from the regulators, there's usually an industry standard to help us have best practices around it. We also see this similar process through every country or region that we go into with regulations and lack of clarity and those things. And just so you know, in Canada, that's one of the things that you're struggling with. And so that's something that we've all struggled with, whether it's the US or Australia or EU. And we're all finding ways through it. A lot of times it really just takes those early adopter sites to pave the way for others, because some are taking the wait and see approach. They're waiting to see who's successfully implementing it, how it went for them. Did they have inspections? Did they have audits? How did those turn out? But once you start to see that these things work and no one's getting in trouble, and then you start following those blueprints, it gets easier and easier. All right, so I'll wrap this up with just a little bit of compliance. I was going to make a joke, but I'm not going to. But anyways, so compliance. So essentially, what is compliance? I really just laid this out easily. And so for Annex 11 and Part 11 to be compliant with systems, it comes down to SOPs. So having SOPs regarding computer system validation, change controls, and things like that, which I know I'm already scaring some of you because you're like, what is that? It's not as big of a hurdle as you think it is. Also, initial and ongoing training. So obviously, you need to train on the system you're using and show proof of ongoing training. Those are all things that we're used to in clinical research training. We all have tons of training records. In addition to that, software features. Typically, your solution provider will have 50 to 100 features just specific to Part 11 and privacy laws and things like that, whether it's data encryption or login credential controls, things like that. So those are usually taken care of. Computer system validation is the piece that scares people the most, I think, which is, what is it? How do I do it? Because a lot of sites, you don't have a computer engineer next to you or an IT person able to explain it. So that's when I would rely on you to, or ask you to rely on either a consultant, which can be pricey, or rely on your solution provider, which is more cost effective. So that if you have a good solution provider, they are very familiar with computer system validation, and they can give you insight into how to handle that. And a lot of times it's a lot easier than you think it is. So with all that said, there are some takeaways here. Just know that we're all in the same boat or ship. We all go through the same process no matter what country you're in. And so, you're right where you should be. But the question is how fast do you want to adopt technology? And so it's really going to take some of these innovator sites to just start paving the way for others. And then on top of that, we do have the risk of being left behind. And so I just want you to think about that, which is these trials are coming. We've seen the trends in the presentations. And so are you prepared? And if you're hanging on to paper, then just think about what the future is going to bring and those opportunities that you could miss out on. But thank you.